Okay. We have two memos here, and I'd like to thank the director and staff for bringing forward the item B around learning resource selection policy and process, because I know that a number of trustees wanted to have the opportunity to have some discussion around that. So I'm going to move then to item B, unless there's some discussion. I believe we have discussed the mental health piece on a number of occasions this evening. Is there any further discussion around that? Okay. So let's go then to the learning resource selection policy and process. And this is an opportunity now for trustees to maybe speak to some of the feedback that we've had from parents in emails and some questions that we might have. I believe staff could help us with that. Go ahead. I'm going to call on Trustee Michelle Arsenault. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. After receiving multiple calls, emails, and just speaking with parents in schools and other functions, this has to be something that we talk about. The resources that we have in school is having a serious impact to a lot of children and parents. And I know that lots of people come here every week and they want to know about what books are in the schools, where, you know, what's in these books, what are the titles, so they can search them themselves. I did myself look at the Sora online library, but without knowing the titles of the book, it can be difficult to find. I had to do my own research to find certain books. And I think that's what some of the parents were having problems finding the books, because they don't know all of the names and titles to them. And the ones that we could find, I mean, this is an uncomfortable topic, but it does have to be a topic that we talk about, because it is upsetting a lot of people. And we want to do the right thing by our children, especially elementary school children. And tonight, I'm hoping that this is a good conversation to helping a lot of children and parents with this situation.
Thank you, Trustee Arsenault. Calling on Trustee Brown.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I did note in the memo that the last time any of these books were reviewed was last spring, so I'm assuming that we're due a review as it is an annual review. So that's the first thing I did take note on the memo. And also I also want to thank all the parents that have emailed. You know, I've tried to answer as many as possible, but we're here today. I feel just the same way as Trustee Arsenault here, that as a trustee, we want you to know that we hear you. And we are going to try and do whatever we can to make sure that you know that you've been heard. And I feel that's really, really important, especially, I know I'm a parent, I want answers too. So coming back to that, if you hopefully get other people to also read the memo, there is a resource selection procedure. And if you have those names of those books that you're uncomfortable with, or you don't like, or you don't want your children, submit the form. You know, the more people that submit the forms is the more that people will take notice. We've all taken notice of all the emails. Don't think that we haven't answered them all. There's hundreds. So we are fully aware of what is going on out there in the schools. And like Michelle, I really hope that we have a really good discussion about this today, because it's obviously a concern. I'm concerned. And I'm concerned as a parent. And it's not just that, it's more, I would like to have a discussion about the review and how we categorize certain books. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be excluded. It just means I would like to know how is it categorized. And as there is already a process in place of how these books are reviewed, we need to be reviewing some more. Or maybe we need to look at, it says up to or more than, I think it says. So we can review more than once a year, maybe twice a year, if this is the issue. So that's it. Thank you.
Associate Director Markovsky, I'm wondering if you would like to speak to some of the procedure that is in the report here.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. And I guess I'll just build on Trustee Arsenal and Trustees Brown's comments in terms of what takes place in relation to the reviewing of books, how it is that books are introduced to in our schools, how it is that they're reviewed. And we recognize that there's many layers to this conversation. Naturally, teacher librarians do work with their school administration and their school staff to introduce new books within the school circulation or distribution model. We've listed within the report that there's a variety of resources that they will use to develop, I guess you could say, a plan in terms of the age appropriateness of the book. So there are naturally, the publisher will give recommendations in terms of age appropriateness. There's a variety of other, the Canadian School Libraries Association, the Ontario Library Association, Common Sense Media. So there's a variety of resources that they will utilize to run what I would say a review in terms of the appropriateness of the book for certain age groups. Based on that review, then the book would be placed in the proper category. I can share, for example, I know there's much discussion in elementary schools that oftentimes that if a book is seen to be, mature themes, perhaps contain some level of sexual content, it will be placed in the library under the young adult section, which would only be accessible to grade 7s and 8s. So there's practices that are in place at the school level, again, guided through the teacher librarian, that would ultimately help sort of create a structure in terms of accessibility of books. That all being said, I want to recognize that we don't always get it right. Hence why there is a policy and a procedure that helps inform how it is that we review books. One of the natural occurrences that when a family member or a student or a member of the community is identified here as a stakeholder within the procedure comes forward and identifies a concern with a book, we engage in what we call an informal review. So the teacher librarian or the principal will consult with our teacher librarian facilitator and our central staff. The book will be reviewed, it will be read, and based on that, a recommendation on how we proceed moves forward. If the individual who casts the informal review is not happy with the outcome, to what Trustee Brown alluded to earlier, there is a form that the individual can complete, and at which point we would move forward to a formal review of the resource. A committee is struck, as you'll see that there is a structure that's in place in terms of how it is that the book is reviewed, and then ultimately the outcome of that review through that formal structure will inform how it is that we move forward as a system. I want to recognize that there are various layers and intersections to this conversation. I do want to acknowledge, too, that I recognize that the role of teacher librarians is very instrumental in reviewing the resources that we have. And there are structures in place, and I would actually encourage trustees, similar to what Trustee Brown said, that if there are families that are reaching out to you, refer them to our procedure. There's ways that we can engage in review of books. And based on whether it's an informal or it moves to a formal review, the outcome of that will help inform how it is that we move forward. I'll stress that in terms of just general points, but happy to answer any specific questions as well.
At this point, I need a mover and a seconder. At 10 o'clock, we need to put a motion forward to extend the meeting to 10:30. So I'm looking for a mover, Trustee Cunningham, and seconder, Trustee Arsenal. All in favor of extending the meeting to 10:30? Show of hands is good. Okay, motion carries. Going to Ben Cameron. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. I am very happy with our policy and procedure on this. I don't think it's our job as the Board of Trustees to pick through every book in a library. I don't think that's parents' jobs either. I think usually keeping books in classes, or in libraries, sorry, are good for students. And even if a book is uncomfortable, often that's the time that books should be in libraries. And there's not a lot of instances where a book being in a library, I don't think, is harming students. It's opening people up to different perspectives and different lived experiences that can help people grow and understand themselves. And it's really important to keep our libraries open and books in those libraries. Thank you.
Trustee Cunningham, go ahead, Emma.
Thank you. I'm also happy that there is this review process, but respectfully, I feel that there is a step missing. I did read Genderqueer myself, as well as reading the case study about it. And I'll admit that I was conflicted. When I read the book, I thought it was an extremely valuable resource for someone, either themselves or learning about non-binary and asexual identities. I thought it was wonderful for that. But there was extremely sexually explicit images in that. And I do see a difference between a school library and a public library. And so to me, the step that's missing from the review is there an alternate book that would fill this need? I wouldn't want to take something like Genderqueer away from that community if we didn't have something in place to plug that hole. And so when someone is coming to us with something that's concerning, I think it's worth asking, is there another way at this? Going back to those teacher librarians and saying, is there another book that will give these students what they need without this concerning part to it? And if the answer is no, then the answer is no. But sometimes it might be yes, and we could make that swap without taking away any of the things that students need to get out of that story.
Thank you. Trustee Panillo?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'm very conflicted listening to discussion because if I take a step back and remove myself from this particular book that we're talking about, as an example, I think we wade into dangerous territory. And I say that because as someone who's openly queer, this was not a book that I had on my shelves, but I can promise you that there were other things that I was reading that might have been a little old for me at the time, in hindsight, but I really valued the relationship that I had with the librarian at my elementary school, who made sure that she was challenging me in certain ways and also directing me in areas where I might be interested and I might not. I understand that not every student in every school might have that same experience, but what we run the risk of doing is imitating what's happening in America right now with their book bans. And I don't raise this lightly because we all just read the report that said Indigenous Two-Spirit and 2S LGBTQI plus students especially do not feel safe in schools. So if you sit with that for a moment and then you sit with this process, which is a fair process and which sets out annual guidelines because yes, things change year to year, and you then say, we're going to remove this book, we'll give them something else that represents them, perhaps, but we're going to remove this book because it makes some uncomfortable. But if you are that student who this is the first book that you pick up that talks about being queer, that's going to be a gateway for you, and that's going to be life-changing. And if we take this book away, then there's nothing to say that groups of homophobic, transphobic individuals in our communities across our nation, which we know they exist, aren't going to spam these types of review systems to have things that they don't like removed in the public system. And that is what I fear, because it's not just going to be 2S LGBTQI plus content. Then it's going to move into certain religions that they don't agree with. It's going to move into certain ethnic groups. We've already seen attempts at Black authors just last year following George Floyd, when you would think support would be highest for Black, Afro, and Caribbean people. It was not. And so there's really no stopping. It goes back to that First They Came For poem. So I'm very, very hesitant for us to insert ourselves into a process which is laid out for communities, for students, for parents, for anyone to participate in, to have themselves heard, but ultimately it's at arm's length from us, and it's by a panel of people who are working at that level every day and understanding the complexities of what students are interacting with online, on social media, what they're seeing on the internet, the impacts that that has, and the questions that it raises. And so I caution this because we get into very dangerous territory, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being concerned about how we categorize things and when people are being exposed to things. Okay, let me clarify that. I do think there's an issue if we start banning books broadly and circumvent this process that has been laid out fairly and equitably for everyone to partake in. You don't have to agree with it, but that is for you and your child, your student, to have a conversation about, and not necessarily for us to go in and intervene. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Trustee Miller, and then I'll come back to Trustee Arsenal. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Just listening around the room and considering all the concerns that have been brought forward by parents and the community, I do believe it is my duty and our duty to make a very clear and conscious response. To me, it sounds clear that the parents would like a review, and as a duty bearer, I do have the duty to respond to their requests. I do, at this point, believe that considering the items that Emma had brought up, that there could be considerations for alternatives. But my concern, coming from the background of child protection and safety, we just had a presentation prior to we had a presentation about school safety. When it comes to the vulnerability of children, and we know from reports from the Canadian Centre of Child Protection that children do not always have the language to understand what they're exposed to or what has happened to them. Under those concepts, I am at the decision that we should be reviewing this book as soon as possible. And I also want to ask this question: when did it become acceptable for us to ignore the vulnerability of students or to have sexually explicit content? I do not have any concerns with information, material, education for all students that require information about their identity. That is a part of our, we need that in our school system. We see the diversity we are existing in this current time, so we're not going to be blind to the needs. But however, again, when it comes to the vulnerability, I will not accept and I will not agree with explicit sexual content for children to be exposed to under the umbrella of information items. And that is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Arsenal.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I am with Trustee Miller. These books have upset me. I've looked at them, I've researched them, I did my part. I don't know if everybody else has, but when we're talking about young children, impressionable children, and the things that we need to protect them. This book has these, and I want to stop saying this book. There's lots of books that we need to review. It's not one book, and it's not the gender, it's not anything like that. It's exactly what Trustee Miller said. It's sexually explicit, okay? We don't see that in children movies. We don't see that anywhere on children, anything for children. If there are parents that want their children to know certain things, I feel as if those parents should buy that for their child. I don't believe that we have the right to just put it out there and say, well, it's information. I don't believe that that's the right thing for children. I really do not. I think that's harmful because as you can see, people who come, and all of the emails that we've been flooded with for weeks on end, there's a lot of people for a lot of different reasons very upset about these books. We can't be casual about them. We can't. These are their children. As my child goes to an elementary school, and I would like to teach her what I feel that she needs to know when she needs to know it. Just like these other, it's not to say they won't teach them. I'm not going to speak for them, but I feel like they need to do that. Not a book in a library to be shared and children having fun with it because they're young. They're not understanding. And I think if we keep saying they understand, some, maybe, but not all. Thank you.
Go ahead, Gwen.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I want to start by prefacing that we're here to represent students. And those students, as you'll know, those students are the people who are accessing these books, which make them the most important stakeholder in this situation. So I'll say that, Director Markovsky mentioned that these books become accessible in the YA section in grades 7 and 8 and beyond. Kids are having sex at that age. And I'm saying that as a representative of students, and from what I know, kids are having sex at that age. So to read about that, I don't think is that obscure. There are many other titles, many of which are straight books about straight sexual relationships that are equally as explicit. And we don't talk about those. It becomes an issue when there's a topic raised about a title that interferes with transgender peoples and homosexual intercourse. And I wanted to touch on a point made by trustees earlier about for some that may be able to understand this type of content at a more mature, who are at a more mature level, and those trustees recommending that students go to their parents for these sorts of titles. I just think that would be very uncomfortable as a student to speak to your parent, especially if you're not out yet, to ask your parent to read content about how sexual relationships work if you're going to be in a homosexual relationship of any sort. And I think that we need to still remember that if we're talking about safety, some kids might not feel safe at home to come out and ask for those sorts of resources. So that is a huge aspect of safety on our students' part as well. Thank you.
Student trustee Ben Cameron, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to mention that if students don't want to read a book, they can put it down, right? We are not forcing kids to read these books. And I think the language that we are using around this table is dangerous and sounds to me a lot like people who advocate for abstinence education. And I don't think that that's what we want. And I would like to reiterate what Trustee Hewitt said, that kids are having sex. The experiences in these books are experiences of real people that go through these situations. And as a queer person that was terrified to come out of the closet, my only representation in media was like Kurt from Glee, right? To have these books that, represent the queer and LGBTQ community is very powerful and liberating for queer students. And it's really, really important. And that we don't react to the angriest parents and the loudest parents, but that we listen to the people who benefit the most from these resources and not the people who can just put the book down if they don't want to read it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Go ahead, Trustee Brown, your last speaker for the evening.
Thank you again, and through you, Chair. I just want to reiterate one of the things, this is not about what type of sex someone's having. I'll just put it out there. I'm quite good with my English literature. The kind of books I'm talking about is called erotica. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that on live YouTube, but that's what it's called, erotica. I personally don't want to see any erotica for children. And what I mean by children, I'm talking about children that are 5, 6, maybe up to high school. It says here in the policy, age appropriateness must be considered. Well, erotica is not actually considered for any child, because even on TV it says, please watch with caution. This may contain violence and sexual content. You get a warning. So I don't care what type of sex it is. It's erotica. That's my concern. I don't care who's having the sex. I don't think it should be in schools. That's my personal opinion. And I've agreed with a lot of the parents. And I know that the justification in this memo was used, a book that was used, Genderqueer, is that right? Was used as the example. That's not the only book. We do know there's a load of books that need to be looked at. And end of the day, this in particular for this memo, that was the one that was highlighted. I didn't put that there. I'm just saying that this is not about what type of sex someone's having. It's about the fact that the book is erotica. And I'm kind of glad I had that as a last say, because that's my concern. Because in a bookshop, an adult bookshop or a bookshop, there is a section called erotica. You can go over there and buy books about sex and having sex in different ways. I know nobody wants to say it, but I'll say it. I think I see those books that I've read is erotica. And I think it has no place in school. Maybe in high school, but again, that comes to age appropriateness. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Trustee Oldfield hasn't spoken to this, so I actually want to go to her.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is good debate. I am incredibly hesitant to get in the business of reviewing books and making decisions based on my own personal opinion, because that's what it would be. Right? I'm not qualified. I don't think anyone around this table is qualified to make a determination about what's age appropriate and what's not. I have had concern about the books, the emails, the concerns around the books, because I haven't seen anyone come forward talking about sexually explicit books as related to what I'd say is straight sex. And there's nobody more sexualized in society than women for straight sex. So I really am concerned, and maybe it's true that this isn't an issue that is directed at the 2S LGBTQ plus community, but it sure looks like that. I haven't seen anything else, and I don't know how are we going to look at all the books? Are we going to look at every book and determine what's sexually explicit? Is there a process for that? Because if we're going to do this, if we're going to review books and say there is no erotica or sexually explicit books, then we better look at all of them and not target a community. And I think it's a very slippery slope, because the next time there's a delegation of the board talking about, Trustee Pinello mentioned this, I don't like this particular religion. That goes against my beliefs. I mean, then what? Do we screen that? Are we not going to be open to people being able to read about different religions, different beliefs? It's a very slippery slope for me, and I personally don't feel that I am qualified to make a determination about these books. I think that the process that we have in place is a good process, that we are reviewing books, that there is a procedure, and I hate to be reactive to a few people, and honestly, getting 10 emails is a few people. When you look at the number of students that attend our schools and the number of families that are out there, it is a small number of very vocal people. That is not enough for me to sway my opinion. What about all the people that are sitting there quite happy and not saying anything? What about all the families that have gay, trans students, children. You know, I really, it is a great debate. I know it's a difficult issue. I know we're all uncomfortable with talking about sex, and that, you know, we heard from a student trustee talking about how grade 7 and 8s are having sex. Should they be? Probably not. Are they? They are. You know, so that makes a lot of parents uncomfortable. Parents are uncomfortable with the fact their children are having sex. Parents are uncomfortable with the fact that their children may be gay. You know, that is why it's important to have information out there, because there has to be a place for children to go when it's not necessarily something they can do at home. Should they be able to? Certainly they should, but that's not the reality in a lot of homes.
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield, and I'm going to go to Director Williams-Taylor.
Thank you, through you, Chair. It's certainly a very complex issue, and we've really tried to present for you in the memo the fact that because it is a complex issue, a board policy and procedure was created. The example given in the memo is a case study that tells you about how it is that books are reviewed, that include the voices of people who experience the book as well as trustees. The other piece is that sometimes when we see snippets and excerpts that are taken and photographs that are shown out of the context of the whole story, we then draw some conclusions. And I have to admit, I reacted similarly when I saw some of the images and the pictures that were being argued about. But then I did go and read the book, and I set some time aside with our library, our library leaders, and we actually did do an exploration of the difference. What is the definition of pornography? What is the definition of erotica? And what is simply sexual content? And they are not the same. And so understanding purpose and intent is the question. I have never had any kind of resistance to students going on a trip to see the David statue by Michelangelo. We see that there are nudes that are presented to students in a variety of contexts, but yet I have never had any kind of pushback on those pieces. In preparation for the conversation tonight, I also did some review on books that have caused consternation and have caused review. In this very room, 20 years ago, Harry Potter was the subject of vitriolic response by the community in the Durham District School Board because it was claimed that it represented witchcraft. We also, if you look at any of the books that are recently under question and in controversy in Canada, The Handmaid's Tale is one of those books. Underground to Canada is one of those books. Of Mice and Men is one of those books. The Wars by Timothy Finley is one of those books. The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz is one of those books. And currently, The Hate You Give is currently under question by some individuals who have a challenge around some of the conversations. So that said, I'm not going to say to you, and I could carry on, but I'm not going to say to you that it is an easy conversation. And this is why it is important to have a process that allows us to undertake, discuss, read the context and the full text in full, and to make some determinations about what it is that these representations, these images mean. What is the purpose of the text? How is the text used? How is the text accessed? And I can tell you there are things that I read or I'm exposed to that make me very uncomfortable. My family is shocked that I will get up and walk out of a movie I've paid for. But if there are things that make me uncomfortable, I will leave them, but I do recognize that I can't simply cut off people's access to them. So I leave it with you to consider the fact that we do have a policy that was passed by the Board of Trustees, that trustees sit as a part of the review process, but to undertake to examine every resource that is available to every student. We have 77,000 of them. It's an unreasonable undertaking. So with your indulgence, Chair, that's my comment on the matter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you all, trustees, for your comments this evening. As there is no further business, this meeting is now adjourned.